Women have been giving birth for centuries, so it's a pretty natural experience, right? Wrong. I'm Stephanie King, professional doula, childbirth educator, and the creator of the My Essential Birth course, the online childbirth education course that's helping women everywhere confidently achieve their best birth. Today's culture would have us think that birth should be treated like an illness or an emergency, and that most of us need other people telling us what's best for our bodies because we aren't the experts. So sit tight, because if you're tuning into this podcast, you'll probably start to believe in your body, your intuition, and find yourself empowered and confident to do what it takes to have the birth of your dreams. If you like listening to me take you through these weekly topics step by step, then you're going to love the My Essential Birth course. Make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast and definitely head over to myessentialbirth.com for the free downloads mentioned right here in these episodes and to join the birth course and community full of pregnant moms just like you. I have to add a disclaimer that I am not a medical professional and I cannot provide medical advice. All of the information expressed in this podcast are based off of personal, professional, and educational experiences and are my own opinions. Please work with a provider you trust for medical advice during your pregnancy and birth. Hi guys, it is me again, and I'm here to give you the reviewer of the week. You guys, if you haven't left a review, please do so. It is so fun for me to read these, and I hope that you like hearing your name come up and you're like, hey, I wrote that review. I'm on the podcast. It's pretty cool. This one is from Keziah S., and she says, cannot recommend enough. I discovered this podcast in my third trimester, and boy, am I grateful I did. Although I would have loved to have found them sooner, I still found the podcast so enjoyable to listen to that I binged them all day long and up until my baby's birth. I thank God for you guys. You helped me achieve a natural birth as a first-time mom. Because of this podcast, I had the peace of mind and knowledge to advocate for myself. Can you guess why I chose this topic? My guest is across from me here, and you will hear from her in a moment. But she said, I had my husband binge them as well, so I had a super informed birth partner, which was absolutely amazing. As someone who witnessed my mother's home births and thought I knew everything there was to know, I discovered how much more there was through your podcast. I'm so blessed and grateful for it. Thank you so much. So I have someone here. We're actually going to talk about advocacy and how to speak up for yourself in a respectful, awesome way. That makes you comfortable in doing it and hopefully really confident in doing that as well. The other thing that I love that you shared was that you had been a part of these home births, or you witnessed your mom's home births, and so you thought you knew all these things. And Karina, I'll kind of jump you in here too. Like, I don't know about you, but when I went to my first birth, I expected to just know everything. I'm going to know what she's feeling. I'm going to know what she needs and when. And it wasn't intuitive like that. I was like really grateful I had some tools.
Yes, yes.
So anyways, you guys are in the right place. I'm really glad and excited that you're following along, that you're leaving reviews. And I want to jump into today's podcast episode. I have Karina Robinson here with me. She's a dear friend and fellow doula and almost practicing midwife.
Almost.
So close. Yes, she's so close. All of my friends are cooler than me now. All becoming midwives. So you guys get to hear from some really awesome people. But we chose a heavier topic today because why not? And we want to talk about birth trauma and advocacy. And the reason I'm so glad I had actually, when I reached out to you, I asked you what topic you wanted to talk on. And when you brought this up, I was like, yes, because what I had seen recently, and since then it seems to have, at least within the birth group, gotten a little better. But I feel like there were a lot of things that were happening to women, the DMs that I was getting, the messages, the comments back and forth, that there's a lot of trauma going on. Like birth is not going as desired lately. And I think I want to get into the whys of that within this episode, but I think it's really important to talk about instead of just being like, imagine your perfect birth and let's talk about all the positive things. That's really wonderful. But what happens to a mom when she doesn't have an experience she loves? How do we recover from that? So we want to talk about prevention. We want to talk about recovery. And I'm really excited to do that today. It's probably something we don't talk about enough, actually. And I think some of that, just like I said, stems from wanting to focus on the good during pregnancy. But I think it goes back to also like what you think about, you bring about. And so what we're focusing on matters a ton. And so if we've got good focus, that's good. But it can also be kind of tough, and I want women who have been through something tricky and traumatic to be able to heal from it. So if you're listening to this episode and you can relate, either you are wanting to avoid birth trauma, or you've experienced something that's been a little tricky for you in the birth space, that I hope this is an episode you can come back to, feel some love, some support, have some guidance. And also, as far as it goes for this pregnancy or your next pregnancy, being able to stand up for yourself. So with that, Karina, will you take a moment and introduce yourself and a little bit about yourself, your family, your work, all of that?
Let's see. My first was unmedicated in the hospital. My second was a cesarean because he was a stinker and breech. And then my third was an unmedicated VBAC or vaginal birth after cesarean.
I love it. Yeah. I actually, maybe you guys will remember, those of you that have been with me for a long time here, but Karina came and talked about gestational diabetes, specifically like a year or two ago? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and you have a course regarding that, and we'll tell them everything at the end, but yes, so really, really awesome. Talk to me about how you got started in birth work.
Well, so let's see. It goes back to my first pregnancy. I knew that I wanted an unmedicated birth and that it would be trickier because I am high risk with my type 1 diabetes. So doing a bunch of reading, we actually toured hospitals before I was even pregnant, and they're like, oh, how far along are you? And I'm like, -4 months. But and just learning everything that I did when just wanting to get pregnant and then becoming pregnant, I was like, why doesn't everyone know this? And so that's what started me becoming a doula. So
that's awesome. I didn't realize that's how you got into it. Mm-hmm. I love that. So you did the birth tours and you're like, why does not everybody know this before they get pregnant? And that's
the tours and all the books that I read and the classes that cool. I took. Yeah.
So you're you're the kind of mom that I love, where I'm like, oh, you didn't have to have a bad experience to get started.
I know.
That's awesome. Yeah. Cool. All right, let's get into it then. Let's talk a little bit about birth trauma. So what is it? If you had to define it, what is birth trauma? No pressure.
Oh, geez.
This question wasn't on the interview outline.
Being traumatized during birth, having something unexpected that negatively impacts you.
Yeah. And postpartum too, mm-hmm. right? Like you look back on that birth and it doesn't feel good. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You don't want to remember it. There may be intrusive thoughts, like all kinds of things surrounding it that make it feel not good in your bones. Yeah. All right. So what causes it? Can we go a little deeper into that? What are some causes of birth trauma? You mentioned situations that are out of our control, which I think is huge, right? Like when there's emergency cesarean, or I didn't plan for my induction to go this way, or I didn't want to use forceps, or the way that I was treated, right? Things that we don't plan on.
Yeah.
I think another part of it, though, and you tell me what you think, is being left out of the decision-making process. So talk to me a little bit about that.
I've seen tons of providers just come in without introducing themselves and just go in for a vaginal exam, and the client doesn't know who they are. They don't know what they're doing, and they're just there, and the doctor's like, well, you're here, just deal with it, you know?
Yeah.
And it's not okay.
No.
Consent matters.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and that's even for a vaginal exam. And just like you said, it might be there every day to go, from birth to birth and stick their hands in certain areas of a body, but for a mom, it's like, that is very personal, and yes, I'm having a baby, but I don't know you, and hello. Like, hi.
Buy me dinner first.
Yeah. My husband's here. Come on. No, that's not funny. Okay, so, right, though, yeah, like being part of the decision-making process, like we talk about this, right, that after a mom gives birth, looking back, whether she feels like it was a good or bad experience has very little to do with the actual, like, happenings of the birth, and a ton to do with how she was felt, or how she was made to feel during that process, right? Like, and I mean, as the mom who's given birth, do you feel that that's the same for you?
Yeah, oh yes, definitely.
And do you feel like any of that came from like the advocating that you had to do for yourself?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, good. We're on the same page here. All right, you get where we're going, right? So, okay, so how do we avoid it? That's the tricky part, right? We want to make sure we have a good experience. What comes to your mind?
A good care provider, having a team that is on board with you, meaning they don't have to, like, especially a care provider, they don't have to agree with your choices that you make per se, but respecting you enough to realize that they are your choices to make.
Right. Okay, I want to touch on that for a moment because you talked about finding a good provider. Now, this is something I scream from the rooftop because I think truly, and my soapbox of like, informed consent. And I think that comes from knowledge and preparation. Like you have to know how to get informed consent, part of that advocating for yourself. But obviously I'm going to take a really good birth course, along with having a good provider. And so how do we find a good provider? What does that look like?
Interviewing them, finding a lot of people are like, well, my sister-in-law liked this doctor, but your sister-in-law may not have wanted the birth experience that you're wanting. So you want to find a care provider and interview them and be like, how many, depending on, like, I'll just talk about my birth.
Yeah.
For what I wanted. Like, how often do you do unmedicated births? How often do you do episiotomies? Like, and their cesarean rate and everything like that, and just how they make you feel, and if you feel listened to, or like they're just like, oh yeah, we're gonna do what you want, and then when it comes down to it, they don't. So
yeah, what was your experience with interviewing different providers then? Did it make you uncomfortable?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you got to step outside of our comfort zone, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
We interviewed a few, and just some of them.
Did your husband go with you?
Oh yes, absolutely.
I love it.
And some of them just they're like taken aback by the questions I asked, and I was like, it doesn't matter why. It matters that I want that. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, check, you're off.
Yeah. I love that. It's true, because as soon as, like, that's enough of the interview right there. It has nothing to do with the questions. It's like, how are you responding to what I'm asking you?
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
It's huge. So how many providers did you go through to find a good one for yourself?
4, and then I had the same provider for my first delivery and my second delivery, but long story there. I changed for my third, and his questions were great, so we stuck with him.
That's awesome. When you gave birth to your other babies, did you do hospital, home birth, birth center?
Hospital, because my type
for
1.
all of them? Okay,
yeah.
Perfect. I love it. Okay, let's get back to birth trauma. So, have you experienced birth trauma?
Like personally?
Yeah. Now I'm like wondering. I didn't even ask you this question. We care so much about it that I didn't know.
I mean, yeah, I guess. It's hard to say yes, because like my experience seems so little compared to others that I've seen. But yeah, a little bit.
Okay. And what did that change for you the next birth, or like?
It brought up a lot of feelings that I didn't know I had, I guess.
When you were pregnant the next time?
Mm-hmm.
That's sometimes how we know.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. That's awesome. Okay. So anyways, I am curious, when we experience birth trauma, because I want to get to the solutions part too, what are some things that are important for women to do?
Talking about it is a good one. Talking about it with people who are supportive of your feelings and not trying to be like, well, you're alive, so it's fine. You and baby are fine.
At least your baby's healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Aren't you so happy?
Yes, that's like, that drives me nuts.
You're like, that's baseline.
Yes, everyone wants that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you touched on it though, like reaching out to somebody safe. So sometimes that's not even just repeating that story with your birth partner, because they might not know how to handle that, or maybe it was traumatic for them too, and it's not super positive to talk about that. What are some resources for women, other people that they can reach out to that are safe, say that they don't have a close family friend or their mom or somebody that they can reach out to?
The first thing that pops into my head is like a therapist.
Mm-hmm. Are there therapists specific for postpartum?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And how do people find them?
The intranet.
I love it. And what would they look for?
Geez, I don't even know. Postpartum.
Like postpartum specialist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. Can I name people?
Yeah.
Okay. The Healing Group is a good one that I know of.
And these are local to Utah?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think they're further south than here, but yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. So online groups, therapists, I think that's really important. Trusted friends, family members, like you said, making sure that it's somebody that can, relay positive back to you. I know even for myself, like if I'm too close to the situation, like if it's my sister or, somebody close to me that I don't know that I'm the best person for them. Like I will listen, I will love on you, but I can't help you even walk through that. Like you need somebody else. And so even recognizing when you're not the person, that can be healing for them, I think is really important. Talking about it out loud is a big deal. Like, you mentioned about like, yes, you experienced some trauma. You didn't realize it until those feelings popped up. So was this something that you had talked about or thought to talk about prior to being pregnant afterwards?
No, I didn't think it would come up, honestly.
Yeah. So when it did, what was that like for you, or what did it do?
It was kind of scary, and it was hard to work through during pregnancy because you are so hormonal. So like I don't know. It was a lot.
Yeah. And what did you end up doing to make it better for yourself? What were some things that you found worked?
Finding out more about the situation. I'm trying to think what else. Just like reliving it and being like, okay, this wasn't my fault, and things like that.
Yeah, that's really important. When you say finding out more about the situation, is that like going and getting medical records?
If necessary, yeah.
That. Those are yours, by the way. If you're listening, those medical records belong to you. There is no, I can't hand those to you, I'm sorry, or I need to get a doctor to sign off on. Those are yours. So my sister actually dealt with that, and it was pretty intense. She's like, okay, fine, I'd like to file a formal complaint. And all of a sudden, she got her medical records.
Nice.
You know, she also filed the complaint. So good on her. I find that any kind of trauma, right, or anything hard you're going through, I think journaling. Did you do any journaling?
I'm not a journaler, so no.
Fair enough. But being able to write it out, same with like the talking, it's a way to like get it out of your head, because sometimes it just sits there on repeat. Am I right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think anything that you can do to get it out of your head, if you're on the more spiritual side of things, prayer or meditation, something, I don't know, yoga, like something where you're like, I'm going to focus and sit with this. And like, I think what you said is really important. This isn't my fault. I didn't cause this. I'm not a bad mother. Those kinds of things, I think are super important. And that kind of leads into the like, you did nothing wrong. I think moms really need to realize that. Have you walked any women through like birth trauma? And that was like, do you have experience with that where you're like, this was the crucial part of this conversation?
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people who are like, where like their birth starts to go downhill and they blame it on one decision that they made previously that has nothing to do with it. And I'm like, that really was not your fault. It's just the way it played out. Okay,
tell me, this is kind of like off the cuff here. Tell me a little bit about, I mean, you've been at a lot of births as a doula. Now you're preparing as a midwife. You've been at a lot of births, more of the hands-on thing. And you have women postpartum, maybe that you didn't even realize had a rough experience. You're like, that felt like they were coping it well and whatever. But then they look back on the birth and they're like, this isn't great. What are some tips, techniques, tools that they could use postpartum, or that you use in your postpartum visits with them to reframe or to help them see things in a different light, or to help pull some of that trauma out so you can really kind of unwrap it?
Just going through the birth experience, like what happened at this time, keeping a timeline, that's one of the things that I do as a doula, and I think it does help kind of reframe, because time gets lost in labor, right?
Right.
And so being able to be like, oh, okay, this that happened at this time, it is kind of helpful to kind of process it when they have the timeline. So kind of going through those, and then like why some decisions were made, and just reliving it, but helping them understand it a little bit more too, because when you're in it, you're not really understanding what's happening.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Tell me a little bit about that. Why do you think it helps them to see the timeline? Do you have examples of that?
Like for some people, it feels like it's been like 2 hours, and they're like, oh, it was only 30 minutes. And then, I don't know, it just makes it, they're able to piece everything together better.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Because sometimes, just like you said, you know, or sometimes it's been 2 hours and it only felt like 30 minutes, you know, or, and when you're talking about traumatic things, and maybe it's like, I was going through transition, it felt like forever, right? And you're like, it was 35 minutes. Yes. Like, you did it. It was 6 contractions, whatever, you know. Anyways, so you're right. Like, labor land has its own time, right? It's like dreams. They can either be like, I just had the longest dream in the span of 5 minutes in between my alarm, or I had like, my dream was so fast, or whatever, and you've been sleeping for hours. So labor land has its own time. I totally agree with that. So I like that idea. And I think that's a good tip too for dads, to like keep track if you don't have a doula, or to remind your doula to do the same thing, but just kind of like make markers in your phone. And you're like, Pitocin started at this time, or contraction started at this time. And, you know, however you decide to make that. But I love the idea of a timeline. So thank you for sharing that.
Because she will ask.
She'll ask. She'll want to know.
Yes.
Right? Because if you're so focused, like chances are your eyes are closed. You don't want to look at the clock. Like you're working through those contractions, and it's like if you have a clock in your body, you're like, that was only 4 minutes, you know?
And I've had some people like hide the clock too.
Or turn it off, or throw something over it. Totally, I agree with that. I think something that I think is important when it comes to trauma is calling it what it is. like to not sugarcoat it and be like, oh, like you said, like, oh, but you and baby are fine. Like you did great, you know? I think validating really and talking to mom and being like, oh, I see where you feel that way and I'm sorry that you feel that way. And, let's, make sure that we validate that moment before we just continue and move on. And then 2, I know as a doula, right, or a midwife, you're probably like, okay, what's the next step? Is this trauma that is going to be able to be worked through by herself? Is she going to need more support? Are we seeing any postpartum mood disorders? What are some other things that stand out to you as a midwife or doula that tell you this mom needs a little bit more support? And what do you think birth partners could be looking for too? Because a lot of moms, we get the benefit of being there pretty quick postpartum and such, but a lot of moms is like they have their baby, they're there for a day or 2 at the hospital, they go home and they don't see anybody until 6 weeks, except for their pediatrician. So what's some recommendations there?
Like for the partners to look for, or?
Yeah, or for moms to be aware of. That like, I'm going to need more support.
Definitely if you feel traumatized from your birth, you will need more support. But so anxious feelings, intrusive thoughts. I always print off for my clients the
Edinburgh scale?
No, not that one.
There's a better one.
The postpartum warrior mom's postpartum checklist one. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Nope. That's okay. Are you able to provide me with a link?
Yes.
Okay, then we will get it in the show notes.
Okay. But it is similar to that one. And I actually don't hand it to the moms. I hand it to the partners because I'm like, you're going to notice before they will the difference in their thinking and their mood and their sleeping habits, eating habits, things like that. So, watching them, and don't be like, how are you feeling today? Like overbearing about it, but just being on the lookout for them, especially if they have had a traumatic birth.
And if they have, I always wonder, like, how's the best way to bring this up to mom? Or do we contact a provider and ask their opinion first? Or what's the process for dads or birth partners then?
Talking to the partner, I think going above them would make them feel more traumatized, honestly.
In my case, I'm like thinking of a doula. I'm like, I would text the doula.
Oh, yeah.
She's safe. She's safe. She'll help me work through this. Give me the right words.
Yeah. And just asking them and maybe asking them to live the birth story again and seeing if there's any thoughts or anything that come up and if they're willing to live it again. So.
Yeah. And is that something that you do as midwives? Because I know as a doula, that's one of the things on the top of my list. I ask them, tell me about your birth story. I know I was there, but I want to hear it from your point of view. And listening to the emotion or the timeline or how they're telling it is really telling. So do you guys do that as midwives, and do you find that's helpful?
We ask them like if they have any questions, because usually that's the thing in the back of their mind, if there's anything that they'll have questions about. And so like explaining to them why we made X, Y, Z decision, but we would have talked about it before doing it anyway, but just explaining to them again, because maybe in the moment it didn't make sense or whatever. But
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you're right. Like, I think that's another one too, is mom will have a lot of questions for her provider. Like, why did it go this way? Or why did we choose to do that? Or it's a lot of the like whys behind things. So I think that's pretty telling too. I think another thing that can be helpful is like positive affirmations postpartum. Have you seen this used? Have you used this yourself?
I haven't. No. Tell me more.
So I know, like, I talk about it for birth a lot, right? Like, you're coming up to your birth, and like, if you're having any fears, right? Positive affirmations and the opposite of that. So if the fear is like for me with my third baby, I had 2 births. They were both hospital. And even though my second was a VBAC and I knew I could do vaginally, I had never done it unmedicated or not used Pitocin. So my fears were like, my body's not going to be able to go into labor on its own. And I'm not going to be able to give birth unmedicated at my house, and I'm going to have to transfer. And so my positive thoughts that I had to move into is like, my body is able to give birth. My body is, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it had something to do with like, I'll make the oxytocin that I need. Like, I'm capable, I'm able, confident, all those kinds of things. But what I think is wonderful is these affirmations. So I was introduced to them in pregnancy, but they work throughout, right? Like, these, you can do positive affirmations every day for yourself, with your kids, whatever. And so I find the same thing when there were like fears or uncertainty or things that were coming from past trauma, and that could have been used during pregnancy because you had a traumatic experience before, or just postpartum because you had a traumatic experience. I think using those things, using affirmations can change our mindsets, and like what we're thinking about, just like we're like replaying that trauma, has an effect on our bodies and our emotional space, our physical well-being. So I think they can be really useful as part of the healing from a traumatic birth experience in that way. And I have seen it used very positively, and I've used it myself. So there's the positive affirmations. Another part of this that I think is wonderful is learning from it. I love the idea of taking something traumatic and making it wonderful, because if we don't learn from it, then we might be bound to repeat it, right? So have you had that experience, or have you seen that with clients of yours?
Yes, I've been able to turn my traumatic experience into something that I share with my clients and make it a positive thing. So, for example, like I didn't know about seeding the microbiome and things like that for a cesarean. And I'm like, if you have a cesarean, you have all of these options that I didn't know about. And like, I feel really good about like passing those on. So it feels healing. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think too, like, don't you believe that like, or maybe you've had this experience, like you learn a lot in retrospect. Like even a birth, you can look back and say, oh, I see. And maybe we should have done this, or maybe we'll try this next time. I think a lot of knowledge comes that way. It's the same with mothering.
Yes.
Yeah. Or relationships. Hello, husbands. Like, maybe I should have been nicer. Retrospect. So I think reflection is super important. And then looking back and realizing, I don't know, just some of those, like, what made me feel scared, happy, anxious, angry, confused, excited. What were those things? Kind of pinpointing like where the emotions come from, and then realizing if there were any communication gaps. So, and all of that is just like future information, right? So it's great information to have. It's more important to put it into practice with the future, or in the future. And same with like when we're talking about advocacy, which we'll get into in a moment, but what do I wish I would have said? Have you had experiences with that? Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm sure you have as like a mom, but probably even also as a doula, right?
Oh, yes.
Or midwife.
Yes.
Like, do you have any examples? And I know I'm just throwing it at you, but I'll let you think of that for a moment. But I think of that even when I'm like, it's so tricky as a doula. Like sometimes I love being a doula, but I hate it in some ways because I'm like, I can't stand up for you. Like I can't say certain things. I can't do certain things. And I'm watching what's going on in mom's head, and it's like, I can't. But I do look back sometimes and I'm like, wow, I wish I would have just stepped in anyways. I wish I would have said this anyways. But I think like as a mom too, or during pregnancies, it was certainly after I had that experience with my cesarean birth, I'm like, I wish I would have known, first of all, that like I didn't need Pitocin, that I could have said no to that. And then I wish I would have had the balls, is the words that's coming to my mind. But, I wish I would have had the guts to say, no, I don't want that thing. So I don't know. I think that's really important to be able to look back and say, what do I wish I would have said or let go? Would it have been worth the fight? A lot of times is like the question that comes to me. Mm-hmm. So, did you think of anything? One
thing that I thought of was I had a client who was getting an epidural, and this anesthesiologist liked her to lay against the bed instead of like some people have you sit up. Lay down. And she was in the middle of the bed on her side, and she was contracting, having a really big contraction, not like the early contractions. And he's like, nope, we just need to get you closer. And he like picked her up and moved her, and she's like, can't you just wait? And like both me and the husband were like, wanted to say something.
You can't jump in.
Right. Yeah. Because it was, I was so mad.
For her, when she said that, did they stop?
No. Nope.
And I wonder why she had trauma. Mm-hmm. That kind of stuff is so not okay. I'm sorry, but other side of the veil kind of thing, those guys need to try on some contractions and see how that goes, right? Okay. That kind of like along with this comment, like there's a reason women get feisty with a birth, and it's that's it. Like, oh my gosh, because sometimes it's just not respected. And I think it's like so frustrating because I don't want to encourage women. I don't want any of you listening feeling like I have to go in there with my fists up. That's never the goal. But you should feel confident enough to stand up for yourself. And sometimes it takes us a couple births, you know, or it's like those Loves commercials. Do you remember the ones where like she's nursing? And and he was in its like first baby, and she's like in the park, and she's got like a shawl on, and she's like, you know, awkwardly trying to nurse her baby, and it's like so weird. And then it's like by the third, it says like third baby or whatever, and she's nursing at the table and ordering food, and the guy's like looking down at her, and she goes, "Eyes up here, buddy, like let's go," you know. And I'm like, sometimes it takes that. Sometimes it takes a couple of births to be like, I said no, back up, you know. But and they need that, because otherwise it's just does what it does sometimes.
Yep.
So back to having a really good provider, right?
Yes.
I don't know what to do about the anesthesiologist, but I mean, you need the husband to jump in is what needs to happen. You need to train your husbands, your birth partners, because they need to be, and I was just at a birth where this was the case, and he was like, hey, and I'm like, yes, because finally, I can't do that.
Yes.
That's awesome. And then kind of the final thing is just allow your next birth, should you choose to have one, to be healing. And I know that that was the experience for me. I hope that that was the same for you.
Very much so.
Okay. Because I look back at that first birth, and you've heard my story a million times, but my first birth was a cesarean birth, and a lot of things happened to me, and I was not involved in the decision making. And those next births were so healing. And that third one especially was like the most healing experience of my entire birthing life. And I was like, I have to share this with the world. Like, it was so good in so many ways. So I totally believe in allowing births to be healing. I wonder, I'm curious what your recommendation is, or what comes to your mind when you have moms who are like, but I've done all the prep work. I took the classes and the whatever, and now something is out of my control. I feel like I'm going into this having no control. What do you say to them to make this like no trauma before they even get there? Because I feel like that's trauma that starts prior to labor. You know, it's not even just during the actual birthing process.
Just focusing on what you do have control over, because there's a lot that we don't have control over, but there's also a lot that we do. So if your care provider, you felt good with them at the beginning, but now there's some red flags popping up, like go interview some others. You may jive with someone better. So
yeah. And I can't tell you how many moms I've had reach out to me and be like, I was so afraid, but I did it anyways. And oh my gosh, I can't believe I tried to stay with this person because this was so good. And I actually had a mom recently that reached out, and she's like, well, like I've changed providers a couple times, and my husband, he's like over me doing it. He says, I'm just going to keep changing until I get the provider that's going to agree with me. And I was like, yes. You should. What's wrong with that? Go find the provider that agrees with what you want.
Yes.
So anyways, that was kind of funny. All right, let's jump into the advocating for yourself. I think these go hand in hand, right? If we want to avoid trauma, and it's not that again, this is not your fault should you experience trauma. Even if you're doing all the things, you're listening here, you've advocated for yourself, you still have trauma, it doesn't make it your fault. But I think they go hand in hand, because I think some of it can be avoided, and that comes from advocating for yourself. So what does that look like? What does it mean to advocate for yourself during birth or pregnancy?
Knowing what you want. So knowing your options, first of all, so that you have preferences, and then having your birth partner know your preferences. And if you deviate from your preferences a little bit, knowing what your backup preferences are, so that he or she can speak on your behalf.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I'm totally there with you. Why does that matter?
Because in labor, you get to a point where you can't talk, and you better have someone able to talk for you that's on the same page.
Yeah, I like that. I think too, maybe it's because of COVID. I've definitely talked about the difference that I've seen here. Just since COVID, with the amount of inductions and stuff, I feel like that has skyrocketed. Like, it was an issue before, but I am having this conversation with pretty much every mom by the time she hits 39 weeks. It's gross. It's very upsetting. But I feel like just overall, women are finding themselves in positions where they need to be more assertive. You just have to. And it doesn't matter what your Enneagram number is, right? It doesn't matter how shy you are. You have to set yourself up for success. We talked about providers. Do you want to talk about birth team?
Like doulas, or?
Yeah, just who's going to be in your birth space as your birth team. Like your husband, or if your mom's going to be there, you have a doula or your provider. Just why or how do we, it's not just the provider, right? So like, how do we set up a supportive birth team so that if we're not assertive, we can be assertive without having to say a word?
Moms are really good at that, as long as there's a lot of moms that are good, and then there's some that are not so good. But the ones...
Bennett births with both.
Yes. The ones that are great are the ones that know like what you want, and aren't trying to relive their birth experience or
heal it.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Or like try to impose the rules that were their rules like 50 years ago. You can eat during labor. But the ones that are on board and know the rules and know what you want and can be assertive for you when you can't.
Yeah. No, I feel like you're absolutely right. Like moms can be the absolute best. Like, don't mess with my daughter. She said this and this and this, and that's what you're going to do. And then I've been at the births where it's like, get out, mom. Yeah. You don't belong here. Mm-hmm. Honey, the doctor says you need the episiotomy. He knows what he's doing.
Yep.
Get out. Anyway.
He can cut you then. No.
Yeah. Let's try it on you first. Tell me how that goes down. And if he does a good job, we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I'm going to push my baby out. But have you noticed this? Do you feel like it's become more of a fight for moms?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do. Yeah.
And do you know, is this like, am I right on here where you've seen this since 2020? Is this what, and I mean, we're guessing. I don't actually know, but this has been my experience. So has it been more recent for you that you're noticing that?
Maybe. I guess I haven't really paid attention. Now I'll have to pay attention. I feel like it's just all the time. But
yeah. Has it made moms more timid? Like everything that 2020 brought on itself? Like, do you find them being less assertive just from like protection of like, I have no idea what's going on or what's safe, or like, just tell me what to do?
No, I find them being irritated with the hospital policies actually and wanting to fight back. So
I love it.
Yeah.
I think that's really positive because and I know I've said this before, but I want it to be a reminder. Hospitals are a business, right? So like they're trying to make money and anyways, but it's this, like you're the consumer. You get to say, you know, I want to buy this thing. I want to have this service or I don't. Like I subscribe to what you guys are selling me or I don't. And so when moms are coming in over and over and they're like, I'm not birthing here if my husband is not with me. Like I will take it home. You know, they've got to rethink what's best for their company. Mm-hmm. It's the same way that like all these years ago, right? Husbands, when women started coming to births during early 1900s, and we started pushing them into the hospitals, husbands weren't allowed. And what happened? Like women started calling into the hospitals and they were like, oh, do you allow husbands to come with me? You know, my husband to come with me. Oh no. Okay. I'll go to a different hospital. And it was just a couple of women that started doing this. Right. And the hospitals were like, oh crap, you know, we better find a way to get the guys involved. Otherwise we're going to lose business. So I think realizing that, I don't know how you feel about it, but like growing up, I think you just think that like hospitals, doctors are an authority. And I mean, in some ways it feels that way very much, but it doesn't make it true. Mm-hmm. And just like when you're saying interview other people, go to different places, like you get to choose, like, do I want Ben & Jerry's or do I want Cold Stone? You know, like you get to choose. So I think that's really important. I don't know. Maybe this is a weird question, but you tell me, does it take more energy to work with someone who has their own ideas about birth?
False ideas, yes.
Explain.
Well, if they expect like all of this to happen and then it goes like this, you know, then I don't know. They're really hard to work with because they're set in their ways and aren't willing to try different things. And yeah.
So they've imagined something in their minds to be a certain way. And if it deviates at all, that's when we have trouble. I think that's a really great thing to touch on because that's something like a lot of people talk about birth plans, and we really did intentionally start calling them birth maps. Like there's a lot of ways and roads and twists and turns that will lead to the same destination of I want a vaginal birth or whatever that looks like for you, not just healthy mom and baby, right? But there's a bunch of different ways to get an ideal birth. And I think being flexible is huge. So like you have your top things, these really stand out to me, but you mentioned this earlier, but if I can't have this thing, what's my backup? Mm-hmm. Like what's that other thing? And I've already thought through it and I'm okay with it if it becomes necessary. Then it becomes an empowering experience instead of like, no, it wasn't on the plan. And so now that it's happening, like it's happening to me, crap, and I didn't have a say. Like it makes it a lot harder. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really important. I think this is one of those tricky things. Like when I think about like the hospital experience, like does it take more energy to work with someone who has their own ideas about birth? I'm like, yeah, it does. Because you guys deal with like 95% of women who are like, okay, I'm here and, you know, keep me safe. And most of them are medicated. And I'm not saying that this is wrong or bad or anything. And however you choose to birth it was wonderful in your own decision. But when you have a provider that deals with a ton of one kind of birth and you have your own ideas about what you would like to do, then it becomes like, you shouldn't be fighting about it. It really should be your experience, but it's out of their scope of normal, you know, and it makes them uncomfortable. And I don't know, they just don't love it so much. And some providers really don't love it so much, or some nurses get all uppity about it. And you're like, dude, back up. I don't know. It's so frustrating.
That's why you don't, I always give this example, when you're interviewing care providers, you're not going to go to McDonald's and ask for a Frosty, because that's just not going to happen. So you're not going to go to a care provider who does like 99% of epidural births and expect an unmedicated, friendly care provider, because they're not going to know what to do.
I like that analogy a ton. Okay, so here's the question. And I know, so sometimes, because it is easy for us to say this, and in most cases it's easy for women to do this, in the sense that if you don't like what you've got, interview somewhere else. Now, I'm going to push the boundaries on this a little bit, but I'm also going to show some respect here. So let me tell you. I have moms that'll reach out to me and they're like, there's only these 2 providers in my area, or there's, you know, whatever. This is just what they offer. This is what I'm up against. What should I do? And I'm like, well, how bad do you want it? Because if that's what you're up against, are you willing to travel? And I'm like, I push that boundary, but I'm like, that's real. And I had to deal with that. And I was willing. I'm like, I will go to the next state. I will go to the next county. Like, so it depends. And there's a lot of excuses that can come up, right? It's like you find an excuse, you find a way, or you find a way. And I think about that because it's like, how bad do you want it? And the hard part is doing that might not even get you, you know, exactly what you're looking for, but it could be a better chance. Now, the other side of that is, for example, you have a young couple that's in the military and they've got TRICARE, or, you know, whatever not veterans, but whatever military medical stuff that they've got, and they have to deliver on base. And I say have to, right? But maybe they have some other options, but maybe they really don't have the funds and they just found this stuff out really late in pregnancy, and this is what they're up against. What are your recommendations? The best way to pretty like sternly but also respectfully stand up for themselves during that birth process as best they can. If they're either scared, unwilling, or feel like they're pinned one way or another, and this is where they're going to give birth.
Hire a doula.
Okay.
Take a class if they haven't. Know their options, all of that.
And then how about, so they have the doula there and things are being offered or whatever. So we've got the doula, like, how do you respectfully stand up for yourself?
Say, no, thank you.
I said no.
Yes.
Get out.
Yes.
Put a sign on the door that says, don't come in asking me any questions or offering me anything ever. Thank you. Oh, I love the simplicity of these answers. It's so true. Because in our heads, right, we like think up this grand thing and how difficult it's going to be. And I'm going to have to explain to them and convince them. And it's like, no, you don't. Like, especially
in labor. They only expect one-word answers from you. It's fine.
Yeah. I think that's where it's like you have to have your birth partner on board. Mm-hmm. Because how many births have I been to that seriously, like, they've taken the classes, we've worked together as a doula, they know what they want, and that provider comes in, and anyways, and the dad all of a sudden is like, oh, like, we should probably do that thing. They're like, wait, we just spent like 6 months talking about this. You don't want the thing. So, yeah.
Another way is just asking for time to think about it.
Yeah.
And even if you're not religious, this is what I tell everyone to do. Ask for time to pray about it, even if you're not religious, because they'll leave the room and give you a moment.
Yeah, and like the big thing is, right, and if they don't, then it's something serious. So I love that. Okay, let's talk. We talked about provider, setting yourself up for success with a really good provider, understanding that it's never too late to change. This is something I've heard a lot recently, like, and this is frustrating, and I do feel for women, but they're like, I'm 36 weeks. And I just figured out, like, this isn't working for me, but I've called every provider in my area or every home birth midwife, and they're, like, booked. Like, they won't take me. So what do you recommend in those cases?
Keep calling.
Yeah, right?
Keep calling. There will be someone.
Please.
Yeah.
Please. Do you ever have you guys had that experience where you're, like, you're booked out, but, like, someone comes to you and you're like, we will have to make this work?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we have.
Yeah. I love that. So keep calling. Find the right provider. Oh, I love it so much. I'm going to say know the red flags, and I did an entire episode on this. Do you have any that stick out to you right now? No pressure.
Jeez.
I know, right?
A big one is disagreeing with you, and then because, like, the care provider disagreeing with you, and then because they've disagreed with you, they think that your answer should now be their answer. And it's like,
huge.
Yeah. You should switch if that is the case.
Yeah. I think that's really important to understand, too, especially when I know that you've come up against this, but it's like you'll hear that a mom is talking with a provider and that provider tells them that what they are asking for or wanting to do is unsafe for them and their baby. And my frustration is, yeah, but if you asked another provider, it wouldn't be. So is it actually unsafe?
No, they just don't do
preference.
it. Mm-hmm.
It's 100% preference. And I think that is so out of line and inappropriate. And I can't even, I don't know. It's coercion, fear-based coercion, and it's really a problem within the birth community. I would say just within doctors community. And I love doctors and I love the birth community. I'm not saying anything bad. But I will tell you from personal experience, it is like time and time again, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know your body. And if you don't do this, this and this and this is going to happen. And most of the time they're totally wrong. And you can feel it when someone's talking to you like that you're like, you even question it in the moment. Even though it's the scary thing, they're like, wait, is that really going to happen? Mm-hmm. So I'm back to the like being informed, knowing your options. But anyways, I have a red flag episode that you guys have absolutely loved, and I will link it in the show notes. So if you guys are curious about that, it's also called something red flag. So go look it up on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.
And listening to your gut is a huge one when interviewing too.
Yes. Because there is something there. Like, even if you don't think you're a naturally intuitive person, right? Do you think you're naturally intuitive?
Yeah, I do, actually.
Oh, okay. Because I do not. But I'm like, I was actually birthed that, like, I'm like, actually, I think I might be a little bit, I'm like, there are some things that I think I was right about. But my husband and I joke that my compass is off. So my north is south, and my south is north. And right? Even like with directions, I'm like, oh, for sure it's this way. And for sure it's not. So anyways, but yes, when it comes to your body and stuff, trust your intuition. All right. Do you have anything that you want to add as far as birth trauma or advocacy or something we didn't touch on or something you really want women to know?
One book I would like to mention is How to Heal a Bad Birth. That one is really good.
Okay. I love that. I will have that. I will link to a copy of it in the show notes. Tell everyone where they can find you, how to connect with you, because you also have a gestational diabetes course that you do privately. You're becoming a midwife. I want people to be able to connect with you that way. You've got an Instagram, so give me all of that information.
So Peaceful Deliveries is my business. Let's see, Instagram, it would be Peaceful Deliveries. My diabetesandpregnancy.org is my diabetes website, and peacefulbirthday.com is my midwifery and doula website. So.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Yes, thank you.
That's it for this week, but make sure you subscribe to the podcast so that you get notifications first as I drop a new episode every week. And don't forget to head over to myessentialbirth.com for all of the free downloads mentioned here and to join the birth course and community serving pregnant moms just like you. If you enjoyed this and other episodes, I would love it if you would take a few minutes to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. I read every single one and include one at the beginning of each episode. See you next week.